I was a good Marine, you know, surrounded by good men, you know, they bring you up to their level. So I didn't like it in the beginning, you know, it was quite intimidating for a 17-year-old to be going through that. But once I passed out of training, you know, and started to realise what the military life was really all about, you know, I started to enjoy it and really become enthusiastic. I think in those 30 weeks of training, you really do go from being a boy to a man, you know, in a very quick amount of time. You know, you go in there wet behind the ears, not knowing what to expect, not really having much experience of life as a 17-year-old. And then, you know, 9-10 months later, you pass out of that place, you earn your beret, you've already done a lot of growing up. I actually took a year out of the Marines in 2006. I left to pursue a civilian career, which didn't really work out for me in the end. And to get money, you know, in the interim, I was looking at becoming a bodyguard. So I'd done the training and I was waiting for work to come in. So while it wasn't, I took a job on a nightclub as a bouncer. And Becky, who's originally from Staines, was down with her friends doing a top-up degree at the university in Plymouth. And I used to work on a cheesy 70s and 80s nightclub. And I'm not sure why, because she was younger than me, but she loved that kind of music. Her friends loved it, and, you know, the atmosphere. And so I'd see her come in week after week. And, you know, there was something about her that caught my eye. And she actually, you know, dented my ego and knocked me back a few times until, jokingly, I threatened to ban her from the nightclub unless she went out with me. And then she did one night. I'm going to take this on the chin and risk it, but I think I fell in love with her before she fell in love with me. Because I definitely told her that I loved her before she told me. So yeah, for me it was, you know, a few months.
He was big built, strong, handsome, good laugh, always spoke to him. Yeah, but just kind of, he kept on asking for my number and I kept on refusing, and then he said he'd ban me if I didn't give him my number. And I thought, well, I like going to this club, so I'll give him my number. And yeah, we just went from there, really.
She was living in a big shared house with all of her university friends. I was kind of at a bad point in my life. You know, I'd left the Marines and things weren't going well. I was kind of sofa surfing around at friends' houses and stuff. And when things didn't work out for my career, I made the choice to rejoin the Marines. So when I would come home on the weekends, I'd stay with Beck home and then stay on camp Monday to Friday.
We just got on like a house on fire, so much in common, and we laughed a lot together, and yeah, just kind of fell in love really, really quick.
And you say you knew you loved her, maybe before she knew she loved you, but did you start making any sort of plan?
I actually wrote her parents a letter when I was in Afghanistan, you know, the old-fashioned way, to her dad, asking his permission to ask her to marry me. I never got a chance to send that letter because I was injured just before I sent it. I was confident she was going to say yes. I don't think I would have asked if I wasn't confident.
We spoke on the phone once a week. If I was lucky, it would be twice. And we also sent e-blueys. I've got a massive stack of our e-blueys which we sent to one another, and we was writing to each other kind of 2 or 3 times a week, which was really nice, and sending them out boxes and parcels and everything out. Some of them was quite comical. He'd asked me to send him lots of things approaching Christmas, and he asked me to get him and all the lads, I think I had to send about 20 Santa hats out to him, so I had to go shopping in town to get all these Santa hats. And obviously when he got back, blown up, going through the pictures, and I saw what the Santa hats were for. And it was a lovely naked photograph of about 20 Royal Marines, just with the Santa hats on.
I was going to land in Brize Norton Airport on New Year's Eve morning, and I was going to be back in time for the party on New Year's Eve. So I was going to have a slightly delayed Christmas, so it kind of made the whole thing easier to deal with. But
I went to my parents to have Christmas with them, and then he was obviously flying back, so I had to pick him up, and we was going to have New Year's together. So it's just a case of we was going to have 2 Christmases.
You want to be back home and, you know, celebrating with your loved ones. And there I was out baking in the desert sun, going on foot patrols, trying to keep these civilians safe out in Afghanistan. So I think it always goes through your mind. You know, the minute you step out that gate, you think back to your loved ones and, you know, what they're doing, and you hope you come back safe.
I wonder what she was doing.
I have no idea.
I got to my parents a couple of days before Christmas, and he had sent a lovely bouquet of flowers and a teddy bear and that, so and a nice little card saying, sorry, I missed Christmas this year, but I'll make it up in a few days, so that was really nice.
We were in a little shallow bowl for cover. That's the only cover that we could get. As I knelt down, there was this huge explosion, and there's this huge cloud of dust, so I couldn't see anything. You know, my ears were ringing from the explosion. My head, you know, brain was rattling around in my head. I said to myself, turn around, turn around. Something clicked, you know, that I wasn't moving and I couldn't twist like I imagined I would. Even though I couldn't see anything, I would know what position my body was going to be in. And then again, almost in slow motion, the dust started to settle gradually further and further down. And that's when I looked down and, you know, I saw the damage to both my legs. From what I remember, you know, you could see the kneecap and the joints and the shins, I think tibia and fibula they're called, they were there from the ankle up to the knee, but all the flesh and bone had been torn clean off. There were no feet, the feet were gone. It wasn't until I looked around and saw the other guys, you know, and one of the guys, the shock in their face, that it started to register a bit more. And then as I swept the ground with my eyes to come back to look at my legs, you know, I wanted to keep looking, trying to send a signal to my brain, trying to figure out whether this was real. That's when I noticed my arm as well, which was pretty much split from the bicep to the wrist, torn open. The bone was gone, it was completely shattered into 1,000 pieces. And I picked my hand up and kind of looked at it in disbelief, you know, like, is this happening, isn't this happening, this is getting worse. Every time I look around it's getting a little bit worse. Dropped it and then just let out this scream, like not a girly one, like a war cry type of scream.
Yes.
So I knew it was going to take a while before anyone could get to me. So my initial thought was that I was going to die. I rested my head down and I closed my eyes and I just pretended that I was on a beach. The sun was beating down on me. There wasn't that much pain. You know, I knew I was in a bad situation, but I just thought, right, drift, you know, pretend you're on a beach, try and relax. And I honestly thought I was going to die. And I remember thinking to myself, if I do die, I'm happy with that. You know, this is the way I want to go. It's honourable. You know, I'm fighting for my country. I'm doing something that, you know, I signed up to do and that I love doing. You know, I felt strangely calm about the whole situation, and just thought, okay, I'll drift off and we'll see what happens. I heard the guy, the medic, scrambling up the rock. He got to me. I still kept my eyes closed through the whole event. Introduced himself very quickly, gave me pain relief, and then started putting tourniquets on my limbs to stem the bleeding. He got me to a position where he deemed me stable to move, and then they got me out of there, got me down onto the back of a vehicle, back into the camp, and then the last thing I remember is a helicopter coming into land, the sandstorm that it creates when it lands, and the heat from the exhaust coming down. And I think the very last thing I remember was the tailgate, the sort of noise that the tailgate makes when it drops. And then I blacked out, and that's when I thought I was dead. I remember feeling very angry. You know, you go through 30 weeks of training to become a Royal Marine. You get told constantly that you're the best of the best and you're elite, you know, and you get a bit of an ego about it, you know, and you on all these other things you do through your career, and you're always striving to be the best, you know, and you like to think that if you ever came into contact with the enemy, they'd have no chance. And then to think that I'd just been beaten by a lump of metal in the ground kind of made me quite angry. I remember thinking that. And then I felt very guilty that I'd put the rest of the section in this position where if this had been followed up with a small arms attack by the enemy, people could have died, and that would have been my fault. I remember thinking back to my daughter Kezia, who was 2 at the time, and if I did survive, you know, I could never go to her school and pick her up because she'll probably get picked on by other kids if her dad has, you know, got 3 limbs missing.
God, you were already thinking that in just the few split seconds you're telling us about.
Mm-hmm. Those were the main 3 things that went through my head at that time.
I got the news about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I remember I was sat in my parents' living room just wrapping the last bits in the presents, and Mark's sister phoned. And she said, oh, I'm at my nan and granddad's. And I was like, oh, okay. Not really thinking much of it. And she was like, oh, there's a Marine officer here. I was like, okay. It still didn't kind of hit me. And she was like, oh, Mark's been in an accident. Oh, I've spoken this so many times, I don't know why. And I just had to pass through to my dad. And my dad spoke to Leanne. And he got off the phone. And it just said, Mark's lost a leg. He's all right. But he's lost a leg. And all I could think, we had a couple of conversations before he went out to Afghan. And he said, I'd rather come back in a box than with any limbs missing. So that's all I could think about. My God, what's he going to be like? He's lost a leg. And then a bit later on, we spoke to his dad, and it was a leg and an arm. And then at that point I was like, oh my goodness, it's going to destroy him, absolutely destroy him. And it wasn't until a bit later that obviously we found out it was both legs and an arm. It was really good, kind of kept in touch, but I just couldn't sleep, I couldn't do anything. I just wanted to get to Birmingham. Although he wasn't there, I needed to be in there for when he arrived. I
was obviously in a drug-induced coma, and I remember it was kind of like being, as I blacked out on the helicopter, but the reverse, so coming back into consciousness, so I could hear people around me. It was quite echoey. I knew there were lights on, even though I didn't have my eyes open. It's like you can sense the light. And I heard people's voices around me, and I recognised Becky's almost straight away.
And he had a sheet over him, so you couldn't see kind of below the sheet, but you could see from his shoulders upwards. And there wasn't a scratch on his face, nothing. It just looked like he was sleeping, he needed a good shower, and he got a pretty good tan while he was out there, and he needed to shave. But I always remember the stench of, obviously 24 hours had passed, and they'd done what they needed to do and just wrapped him up, but kind of everything was still seeping through, and the smell, I had to sit down, it was that strong. Yeah, and that's all kind of, I remember just the overpowering smell, but Mark just looking so perfect laying there, but obviously you could see where his legs ended and his arm. And the only thing that was going through my head was, how was he going to cope? It didn't even cross my mind that he'd have brain injuries, internal injuries, anything like that. I think in my head it was literally just kind of the loss of limbs and that was it. But actually looking back, he could have had a severe brain injury, he could have had internal injuries, but it never crossed my mind. All what was going through my head was, oh my goodness, how's he going to cope? Is he going to cope?
I actually proposed to Becky that first time I woke up in the intensive care ward. When I heard her voice, I could hardly get any words out. I was so weak, and she was like leaning really close, trying to ask me what I was saying. And when she said, "Did you just ask me to marry you?" I kind of just smiled.
He had the oxygen mask on, and he was trying to say something, and I couldn't, for the life of me, understand what he was saying. And he said it about 6 or 7 times, and I was a bit like, "Did you just ask me to marry you?" And he's like, "No, finally." And I was like, "Of course I will."
You were asking her a really difficult question at a difficult time.
Yeah, and I selfishly didn't think of it that way at the time. Looking back, I do. Looking back, I realised that actually, did she say yes because she felt pressured or anything? But I hope she didn't.
He was alive. He was my Mark. He was alive, and yeah, didn't cross my mind at all.
Did it later?
Nope.
Has it ever?
No, never.
Can you explain that?
I don't know. I think we're just we're soulmates, and just absolutely worship the ground he walks on, and kind of no matter what happens, he's my Mark, and support him through thick and thin.
Before I was injured, I didn't know anybody missing a fingernail, let alone an arm or a leg or multiple limbs. and it was a whole new world to me. I don't think, know anybody who was disabled. You know, my whole life was surrounded by military guys who were overactive, you know, jumping out of planes and off cliffs and things. And it was a whole new world to me, and I knew nothing about it. It was completely new, and I had to relearn everything from scratch.
He had a guy come in to see him who was meant to be the leading guy in the department of kind of prosthetics and walking, and he turned around and he told him pretty much, you're not going to walk again. If you do walk, it'll be for an hour, 2 hours max, and you'll be in a wheelchair for the rest of the time. And that took his morale so low. But luckily enough, the next day, another injured guy came in, double leg amputee, and showed us exactly what he could do. But he was in the army. So Mark kind of took that all on board, and that's what he can do. Well, I'm a Royal Marine and I'm going to do it 10 times better.
Then Mick came walking in my room on a pair of prosthetic legs, you know, off his own back. He must have heard about what had happened to me, decided to make the trip up to Birmingham and come and see me and let me know that there was hope. And he spent a good few hours out of his day. He took his legs off, he explained how they fitted, he taught me about the whole fitting process, he taught me about the technology, you know, the Bluetooth sensors, the programming, that you have to hook them up to laptops and get them programmed to, you know, get you the best possible gait you can. He taught me through everything and, you know, let me know that there was hope. In the very early stages, you know, I'm not afraid to admit that I cried. When I came out of hospital the first time and got fresh air, we went to a flat which was provided by the military for my family to stay in. And it was the first time I saw myself in a mirror in the bedroom. You know, before I'd been injured, I'd been 6'2". I weighed about 16 stone. You know, I worked out a lot. And now I saw myself, I think I was just under 10 stone. Really gaunt, my eyes were sunken in my head. You know, my neck was really skinny. I saw myself with no legs, with only one arm. And it was just overwhelming, you know. So I just broke down in the flat. You know, how could anybody love someone like this? But for me, I didn't have any other option but to walk on the day. I remember thinking, you know, I know people take lots of photographs and you have professional photographers there. I didn't want photos hanging around my house of me sat in a wheelchair. You know, I knew I was going to wear my uniform, I was going to have my medals on, you know, and be looking smart. And I think sitting in a wheelchair and doing that, for me, would have ruined it. Not being in the wheelchair, but because I have the ability and I'm lucky enough to be able to stand and walk. I think every time I looked at those photographs, I would have felt like a bit of a failure. Like, you should have worked harder to walk and have these, you know, these photographs are going to last forever. So I trained hard and pushed myself to be able to walk that day. You know, I had to get my uniform retailored, and there were a few issues with it. You know, I was still in a lot of pain on the actual day. It hurt a lot, standing there and walking and dancing and stuff. But, you know, I had to do it.
It was weird. I kind of woke up in the morning expecting to be kind of butterflies in my stomach, really nervous. And I wasn't, and I was so calm. I think my bridesmaids and my mum was more nervous. I always remember in the morning, my dad was like, can we practice walking down the aisle? So we had a few practice runs, and I was just so calm. It was unreal. And then, and we got married outside. It was a beautiful, beautiful day. Everyone was sat outside and kind of walking down, and Mark stood at the end. And there could have been a million people there, there could have been no one there, because it was just me and Mark. It really was just kind of looking at each other all the way down, and yeah, it was an amazing day.
Everyone was sat out with all the chairs, and she came out the back, walked up, you know, as you say, traditionally.
Can you remember how you felt?
Yes, very proud, very proud. You can't
of her and you?
Not me, not of me, of her. What people find difficult to understand is my life now is a million miles away from what it would be, I think, if I didn't get injured. If I didn't get injured, I think I would have returned from that tour, went on 2 or 3 more. I'd probably be a sergeant now, you know, doing the same kind of routine, travelling around. And now, you know, my life consists of, I travel around the world, sharing my story with people, do that stuff that I would never have been offered before. The Gumpathon was back in 2010, and myself and a bunch of other military guys. I was the only injured guy on the team. We landed in New York, and we basically ran across the whole of America. It finished, I think, 63 days later, over 3,500 miles later, in LA. So the way it worked was they would break down into teams of two. One guy would be resting, and they would run maybe 10 miles in the morning, each person, so covering 40, 50 miles a day, until we got to the other side of the country. And my part initially was to just run 1 mile, using specialist running prosthetics. But because I don't have any knees or any ankles or any feet or toes, everything was driven from my hips and my bum and my lower back. And it took, like, I think it's about 600% more energy for me to run anywhere than an able-bodied person. 2012, I did something similar, but it was cycling this time. So I was on a hand bike with a team of guys. There were, I think, 4 of us. And we started in Plymouth, and we hand cycled all along the south coast, up the east coast, up to Inverness, straight across Scotland, all the way back down to Land's End, and then back to Plymouth. So I think 3,102 miles.
What are you trying to prove?
I'm not doing it as some big macho thing, look at me, look what I can do, because, I mean, falling out of a plane strapped to some guy is not particularly difficult or challenging.
Throwing yourself off a tall building on the end of a bungee rope is.
It's just stupid.
Yeah.
But, it's not, particularly big, look at me, macho man type stuff. It's just my personality. It's the things I've always been this way.
Evelyn's a complete daddy's girl, completely. And Mason, Mark chucks him around and they have little play fights and all sorts. They're just absolutely brilliant together. And yeah, I just think it's that extra special because it is that little bit harder for Mark, but he's willing to put in that effort and to have that relationship with his children.
I was a dad before I got injured. I've got a daughter from a previous relationship. It didn't work out, but I've been given not a second chance, but a second and a third chance now with my other 2 children, and it's just wonderful. It's hard, and not just physically, but mentally. If my son runs through the house, trips on a stairgate and hits his face on the floor, to be able to not just walk over there and pick him up and cuddle him to shake it off is hard. Me and my daughter now, something I didn't think I'd be able to do. We go out on our own. We have these daddy-daughter dates where I'll take her out on my own. Whereas before I thought I'd need a carer or someone with me, and we couldn't ever do that whole bonding thing. Now we can. We go out for breakfast together. We go to the cinema, to the park, and you just spend time together on our own. My son now can walk, so little things like, it was difficult in the beginning to pick up my daughter and take her seat to the car and do all that and stuff. Now my son runs out, I just throw him in there, put the belt on, and we can, go certain places on our own. So as they grow and they become more independent, it opens the doors for me to have a more active life with them.
How do you think you'd ever feel if any of them said they'd like to go into the military?
I wouldn't stop him doing that.
He's a fighter. I think he's just overcome so much.
I never give her enough credit or praise for the things she does. And sometimes, and I've admitted this to her before in some of my mushy moments, sometimes I get so busy and caught up in my own life that I do neglect her, and I know that now. So every once in a while I take time out and I let her know what she means to me, because I couldn't do any of this stuff that I do without her support. She's my world, she's my rock, and that sounds corny and cliched, but a lot of people don't see what goes on behind the scenes in these kind of situations. A lot of people don't see 2-3 o'clock in the morning when I'm up and I'm maybe angry about something. She's the one that sits up with me and gets me through it. Becky's a fantastic mother and she's very natural at it. And because of our situation, she takes the lead role in that, which is great. And because I can't do so much with the kids and, as I'd like to, I think I've thrown myself into my work and earning money to try and compensate for my lack of being able to be a dad in the early stages. So it's kind of, we didn't set out to that, did we?
No.
It's just kind of, that's how it's fell into place, and that's how it works, and it suits us both, doesn't it?
And that's how you get out changing nappies.
And that's how I get out changing nappies too, yeah. I think I'm too, not OCD, but militarised, as in, this has to be here, this has to be, we have to do it this way. But even more so now that I'm injured, to make my life easier, and I'm always whinging and about, you know, I come home and there's like another minefield to get through, with kids' toys everywhere, and trying to get up the stairs and falling over Fireman Sam trucks, and you know, but
Love it, really.
yeah, no, it's all memories and it's all good stuff. But I think I am more of a pain than you'll ever let on. I can be a bit of a whinger. I have my moments, don't I, where I can be mushy and be nice and, you know, say what I'm really feeling. But you know that you're my world, and I've told you before that I can't do any of this without you. You take on more of a responsibility in our marriage and with our family than I ever tell you about. Well, I've told you before, but you know, I don't tell you enough, like most men. But I hope you know that anyway.
And Becky, can you sum up how you feel about him in front of him?
I think you're a complete arse. And no, you are my absolute world, and I'm so grateful that you're here, that you're still with us, for all you do for me and the family, and just.
I think we just work.
We do.
It's
strange. We do really work.
I can be in the foulest mood ever and wrongly take it out on Becky, and she'll just laugh at me, or just
not to wind him up.
no,
I
she just like mood. Yeah, and it's bizarre. No one can make me react that way, you know, in that positive way.
I think we get each other, don't we?
I think it just, I don't know, we just click and it works.